Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Russ Riesinger. Tonight, President Trump is vowing a military crackdown on violent protesters.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
The president is now threatening to call out the military after days of protests, many of which have been anything but peaceful. Protests have restarted in the nation's capital tonight, where President Trump is calling for a stronger clampdown from state governors. Demonstrations and riots were sparked, of course, nationwide over the police-involved death of George Floyd in Minneapolis last week. Natalie Brand is in Washington with more.
In a Rose Garden address, the president called on state governors to crack down on nationwide demonstrations after some have turned violent.
I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
Afterwards, President Trump visited the nearby historic St. John's Church. Presidents dating back to James Madison have attended services there. Chaos ensued outside the White House gates moments before the statement, with tear gas fired at crowds gathered there. Washington, D.C. is one of more than 40 cities where curfew orders are in effect to try and stop more looting and vandalism. The thousands of peaceful demonstrators don't want violence to overshadow their calls for change. In Minneapolis, George Floyd's family visited the growing memorial to honor his memory. His brother called for peaceful protests.
What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing, because that's not going to bring my brother back at all.
The Hennepin County medical examiner has ruled Floyd's death a homicide, saying the cause was cardiac arrest. But an independent autopsy commissioned by Floyd's family came to a different conclusion.
The cause of death, in my opinion, is asphyxia due to compression of the neck.
Derek Chauvin, the former police officer, is charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. He's due to appear in court next Monday. George Floyd will be buried the next day in his hometown of Houston, Texas. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
And again, a memorial for Floyd scheduled for Thursday in Minneapolis. Well, former Vice President Joe Biden met with African-American leaders this morning. If elected, the presumptive Democratic nominee promised to form a police oversight board within 100 days of taking office. He also suggested that police under attack in the line of duty should be trained to shoot assailants who aren't armed with a gun in the leg instead of the heart, as a way to avert the killing of civilians. Meanwhile, closer to home, peaceful protests continued at the Missoula County Courthouse for the fourth straight day. About 150 people gathered in Missoula, but the message has not changed. Protesters saying tonight that they want change and do not want to live in the fear of police. Many of the gatherers arguing that step one of the change begins by voting in this upcoming election.
I don't think there's any other key but being peaceful. I am not for the riots and the looting, but I am for standing arm in arm across the entire nation until the brutality comes to an end.
It's really insulting as a culture that doesn't want anything but equality to be disgraced, and not only disgraced but murdered in cold blood day in and day out, time after time again, and nobody can do anything about it. It's really, really hard to watch.
And we do know at this time there is a scheduled peaceful rally in Billings this coming Sunday. Well, tonight, local, county, and state officials zero in on recent COVID-19 outbreaks here in south central Montana. Over the past week, 40 new cases of COVID-19 have been identified in Montana. Of those cases, 22 in Bighorn County and 12 here in Yellowstone County. Governor Steve Bullock today focused on the two separate cluster cases tied to these spikes. The Yellowstone County cluster has been linked to the Yellowstone County Jail. Both cluster cases are still under investigation, but the state has been able to link all of the cases to an origin Community spread, where an origin cannot be determined, has not yet been documented in the state. Governor Bullock says at this time he's not considering going back to phase 1 for the state, but notes that local and county officials can increase restrictions if they feel it's necessary.
I want to underscore that for every positive case we have right now in Montana, there's not one case in Montana where we haven't been able to identify exactly where that positive transmission came from.
State Medical Officer Dr. Greg Holzman says the state is actively looking at ways to limit any spread from tourists, but fortunately says tourists who come to Montana tend to spend the majority of their time outdoors or in their own family units. Well, 8 female inmates and a jail staff member at the Yellowstone Detention Center in Billings have now tested positive for COVID-19. The first inmate tested positive on May 24th and was hospitalized. They then tested another 34 inmates in that unit, as well as 41 staff members. That's where the other positives came from. None was showing any symptoms of the disease. The close quarters of a facility like a jail make it the perfect environment for a virus like COVID-19 to spread, but the sheriff says they've done everything possible to keep that from happening.
In the meantime, we'll continue doing what we're doing, the cleaning, the sanitizing. We're able to provide some isolation simply because of the new women's unit down there that we just recently built. Had we been in the old facility, we probably would have been in a much different circumstance, unable to isolate or quarantine anybody. But because of the 5 separate pods that we have down there, we are able to do that. So
we continue to work with the jail for contact tracing and to identify people who could potentially be exposed, and if needed, get more individuals tested.
For the most part, most of the people in there are in there because they need to be in there. And I think if there's any challenge to that, it's business as usual. Motions can be filed and they can get their bond reduced. They can be released on their own recognizance. We do that constantly on a constant weekly, daily basis.
County Attorney Scott Twido is saying that they'll deal with any legal challenges if and when they come. The other 28 inmates who tested negative are still being quarantined and monitored for any signs of COVID-19. Bighorn County health authorities have also confirmed another positive case. That result, the first positive from last week's surveillance testing on the Crow Reservation or in Hardin. This case is in addition to 4 cases announced this morning across the state. Yellowstone County has now reached a total of 100 cases. In Wyoming, the state's total confirmed cases has now reached 700, and a 17th person has now died from coronavirus, a woman without any known conditions that would have put her at a higher risk. In Billings, the city parks are loosening restrictions, opening up playgrounds and sports courts again. While social distancing is still recommended, kids can once again grab the monkey bars or go down a slide. The usual summer camp offerings are in full swing, but will begin at 75% capacity. For those looking to take a swim, South and Rose Park pools will open on Wednesday, and the wading pools at Pioneer and Hawthorne Parks will open on June 8th. Unfortunately, for fans of the Billings Spray Parks, not quite yet.
The recommendations we've gotten to this point from the Yellowstone County Health Department is that the spray grounds would be a phase 3 opening. So again, whenever the governor hopefully announces a phase 3 opening, the spray grounds would open at that time.
For more information about the opening guidelines for city parks, you can visit billingsparks.org. The Billings City Council is working towards passing a budget for 2021. The council has been asking city staff to make cuts anywhere it could to help offset a recurring $5 million shortfall in the general fund. Q2's Mitch Legge brings us details on the reductions.
The 2021 Billings City budget is scheduled for approval on June 22nd. In its current form, all of the city budget is worth $318 million. In the meeting tonight, the Billings City Council saw about $1 million worth of reductions. Proposed changes to the budget included hiring a public information officer halfway through the year instead of at a full year. And since gas prices are lower than expected, the city budgeted $150,000 less for fuel costs across the departments. Those reductions, along with a handful of others, amount to $1 million reduced from the 2021 budget. But the city is still expecting to go out for a public safety mill levy in November to help shore up the budget. The city council is expected to ask 2 levy-related questions of the Billings voters. If both approved, the city won't have to dip into its reserves to cover the 2021 budget. In Billings, Mitch Legge, MTN News.
All right, thank you, Mitch. And for more on the proposed levies that may be before Billings voters, you can search City Council on our website, ktvq.com. All right, turning to Chief Forecaster Bob McGuire. Bob, you were telling us last week you thought those river levels were really going to be rising, and we're already seeing a little bit of flooding now.
Yeah, let me show you some pictures. Got a couple of them here. We start off with this first picture. This is from Edgar. This is the Clark Fork of the Yellowstone. Tracy Glenn got this one. You'll notice it's getting high. It's getting close to the roadway. And over here, this is the Yellowstone River by Shepherd. That is running deep as well. Maybe some flooding in that area. And this just came out tonight. Check this out. We have a flood warning at the Yellowstone River at Livingston. Yellowstone River has a flood warning at Billings. That's flood stage is 13.5 feet. His current stage is 13 feet. His forecast to crest at 13.6, possibly just a little bit over flood stage. So we could see some minor flooding in the Billings area. Clark Fork of the Yellowstone at Edgar is at almost flood stage. And over there, Belfry, it is at flood stage 9.1. Flood stage there is about 8.5 feet. So yeah, it's getting pretty high. And all of this, thanks to the high heat, is causing all the snow up on the top of the mountains to melt and push right on into the rivers. We'll have your forecast in a few more minutes.
All right, thank you, Bob. In Billings, police say they're investigating the Sunday night deaths of a 35-year-old man and a 34-year-old woman as a murder-suicide. Police responded to the 2100 block of Canyon Drive to find those bodies. Lieutenant Brandon Woolley says the man appeared to have a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Montana's first all-mail-in election is proving popular among voters. In fact, a record turnout is already in the books here in Yellowstone County and statewide as well, with still one more day. Here in Billings, as of this morning, 48,000 ballots had been mailed back to the county elections office. That breaks the previous record by some 5,000 and continues to grow. Statewide, more than 312,000 ballots have been mailed back. Elections Administrator Brett Rutherford tells us there's been a steady stream of people dropping off ballots all day. And for voters who have yet to turn in their ballot, you can do so in person tomorrow at one of 4 ballot drop sites across the county from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Those sites include the county elections office on the first floor of the courthouse downtown, the Metro Park box office, the Yellowstone Valley Electric Co-op in Huntley, and Laurel High School. And again, the deadline to drop off your ballot is 8 p.m. tomorrow. And we'll, of course, have complete coverage of the election tomorrow night here on Q2 News at 10 o'clock. Still ahead on tonight's 10 o'clock news, the remains of a late veteran finally make it home after weeks of being lost in the mail. Plus, summer is in session as the Boys and Girls Summer Club is officially underway. We'll take you there. And in sports, we're going to hear from the Royals and the Scarlets fresh off their season debuts this weekend.
You're watching MTN News with Janelle Slade and Russ Riesinger. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Breen. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.